Shalama, y'all, which means peace in Aramaic, which is the language that Yeshua spoke. This is DiversiTV, a weekly interview show broadcast live and rebroadcast once a week from Lane Community College, main campus. I'm Mark Harris. If you are new to DiversiTV, welcome. If you're a part of our growing legion of fans, welcome back. DiversiTV has a mission, and we accept it, and it's to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. And to that end, our mission basically has stretched over what we call 10 seasons, which roughly correspond to LCC terms. We've been doing this since '07 for a good 3 years. This season, we've had guests from a Lane program, Transiciones, a young reporter from The Torch, giving a young black gay male's perspective. And today we have actually looking over our first guest of an overtly Christian persuasion, who I'll introduce in just a second. Now, my main job is as a substance abuse prevention coordinator, and I basically essentially am the drug counselor for Lane Community College. And in the addictions field, which I've been privileged to work in for nearly 40 years, there are a number of recovery frameworks, but the main recovery framework that people have most name familiarity with is the 12-step program. Now, there are a number of recovery frameworks for dealing with addictions. And the one, of course, the 12 steps of AA and its mimetic offshoots, Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous, Gambling Anonymous, etc. There are other frameworks, including Rational Recovery, Life Ring, that are more secular in nature, which developed in response to the Christianesque religiosity in 12 steps, aka what clients referred to as the God higher power thing, which because of people's experiences with mainstream religion basically often scare them off, or they're uncomfortable with it, sometimes returning to it, sometimes rejecting it permanently. In any case, the other frameworks, which basically all those other frameworks that involve abstinence, as well as a spiritual cultural framework as a pattern for non-addictive living, could include recovery from the sacred pipe, the Lakota construct, the Nation of Islam 6 steps, Glide Memorial Church's Terms of Resistance, to just quote 2 from an African American framework, 13 Circles of Recovery, the Pagan framework, 16 Steps of Recovery and Empowerment, to name a few, all quoted in Charlotte Castle's book, Many Roads, One Journey. Because the Recovery Center facilitates any viable recovery framework that works, and that's defined fairly loosely by the practitioners, and because Lane as a public institution does not endorse any particular religion, so I've had people come in, and Muslim students use the conference room that's used for 12-step meetings, for their daily prayers and other things like that. So I decided to have a Christian-based recovery framework on the show, because they don't necessarily get the mic, but you'll find if you investigate Celebrate Recovery that it is quite well funded and can afford mics and video of their own, as viewed on the website. Then looking through our list of guests, I found I hadn't seen any overtly representing Christianity, because the Lord moves in mysterious ways. I was emailed by Dave Wadsworth of Northwood Christian. Now, Pastor Rick Warren of Saddleback Church, of the Purpose-Driven Life fame, who delivered the invocation, if you recall, President Obama's inauguration, facilitated the creation of Celebrate Recovery. And this is a quote from their website. "What we need is a biblical and balanced program to help people overcome their hurts, habits, and hang-ups. Celebrate Recovery is that program. Based on the actual words of Jesus rather than psychological theory, our recovery program is unique and more effective in helping people change than anything else I've seen or heard of. Most people are familiar with the classic 12-step program of AA and other groups. While undoubtedly many lives have been helped through the 12 steps, I've always been uncomfortable with that program's vagueness about the nature of God, the saving power of Jesus Christ, and the ministry of the Holy Spirit. So I began an intense study of the scriptures to discover what God had to say about, quote, recovery, unquote. To my amazement, I found the principles of recovery and even their logical order given by Christ in his most famous message, the Sermon on the Mount. And for example, what he's referring to directly here is the 8 recovery principles, which are an adaptation from the Beatitudes. And there are also, Celebrate Recovery also has its own adaptation of 12 steps. You go back to the slide if you would. Thanks. So Celebrate Recovery also modifies the 12 steps along biblical lines using the NCV, TLB, GNB, and other modern English-only versions as texts. While Pastor Rick appears to eschew psychology, terms like denial, family of origin are used within the framework, and some 12-step terms are even acrostically, that is, acronyms turned into guiding principles, like, for example, powerless, confess, turn, etc. Our guest tonight, Dave Wadsworth from Northwood Christian Church, Celebrate Recovery. Welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be here tonight.
Where are you from?
Originally, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, but I've been transplanted to the Northwest over 30 years now, so I consider myself a Northwest person.
Okay.
And, I'm presently in the Springfield area.
Okay. How did you come to Eugene?
About 5 years ago now, my father was diagnosed in the late stages of Alzheimer's disease, and I was at a position where I had retired from the hospital I was working at, and we decided that we'd like to be able to keep him in the home rather than put him in a nursing facility, so we moved down here so that I could care for him during his last year and a half of life. So that's how we originally got moved down to the Springfield area.
Okay. All right. I saw Pastor John Baker's story on the Celebrate Recovery website. What's your story?
What's my story? Well, Mark, we only have so many minutes, but here's the short story.
Worry.
Here's the short story, short version. In 1999, I had come to a point in my life living in a dysfunctional relationship with my wife, who is an alcoholic. And neither one of us being in recovery at that time, I had come to a point where I actually felt that ending my life would have been a better solution than what it was living it. And I had made plans to do that before the turn of the millennia. And 2 weeks before the end of that year, I had spoken with a friend at the hospital who I knew was a member of AA. And I had asked her, what do I need to do to fix my wife? And she laughed at me. She thought that was pretty funny. And she said, well, the first thing that you probably need to do is go check out an Al-Anon meeting. And so with 2 weeks left of the year, I did go to an Al-Anon meeting in a little Lutheran church in Linwood, Washington, down in the basement, about 7 people there. And I, of course, walked in and I was asking the questions, what do I do to fix my wife? And they all laughed at me. I was beginning to think it was quite a joke. But as we went through the meeting, they were talking about my codependency and how I had to fix myself, and it was very confusing for me because I didn't even know what they were talking about at that time. But what I came away from that meeting with is that two critical things. One, there were people out there who were living their lives in situations very similar to mine, which I did not believe until I went to that meeting. I thought I was the only one in that situation.
A community of suffering.
Yes, a community of suffering. And two, that somehow these people, even though they were still in these bad situations, had been able to find some form of serenity in their life through working this 12-step process that they were talking about. It gave me enough hope that day walking out of there to say, well, maybe I should check this out for a couple of weeks. I can always kill myself after the beginning of the year rather than before. And that started...
What was significant about the millennium? Is that part of the general Christian-esque thing about Jesus was coming back?
No, it was just where my head was.
Okay.
I just, you know, it was a good delineating line. I was working in the computer field at that time, and, you know, we were doing the Y2K ramp up, and as you know, like, just finished, good place.
Yeah.
So I started to attend Al-Anon meetings. And started to grasp what they were saying in the 12-step groups. And as that began to make a change in myself, I started to realize that, oh my gosh, I do have quite a bit of dysfunctionality in my own life that, you're right, needs to be changed before I have to worry about whether my wife needs to be changed. She subsequently got into a recovery program, and I started on this path. But I did that for about 2 years.
So you, okay, so to be clear, I mean, as you said, just to restate it for the audience, so your wife was the alcoholic.
Yes. And
you were the codependent. And,
absolutely. And
of course, you have to have your own recovery independent of whether your wife gets clean and sober, to use the vernacular, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
You know, we can only change ourselves. We can't change anyone else, and that's, you know, the whole basis of the Serenity Prayer itself. And so again, if you focus on the things which you can change, then you're going to be looking at yourself.
Yeah.
So I followed along with the traditional Al-Anon meeting for about 2 years, but there was only one available in the area of Western Washington we were living in, and it was well, there were a couple of things. Number one, there was 8 women and myself, which felt a little strange, being in that group. And then the other thing
is... But predictable, actually.
But yes, very predictable, when you understand codependency.
Yeah.
And also, they were very... they were from a cultural base that was very open to Eastern mysticism, but very close to Christianity.
Yes.
So when I wanted to talk about my higher power, who happened to be named Jesus Christ, they felt that was inappropriate, and so they would put that portion down.
How?
Well, they'd say, "Oh, well, we don't talk in names here. We don't, you know, we're not going to. We don't want to listen to about Jesus Christ, you know." But they're talking about their Eastern mysticism, the chakra, and all of the other stuff. I found that a little interesting, but it was tolerable for a time because I was in recovery and I was growing.
I don't want to digress too far from that. So, well, in doing this work, we come up upon this dichotomy or this condition a lot, where people get into religions or whatever, or spiritual frameworks that they weren't raised in.
Right.
So I would venture a guess that they weren't raised in Eastern mysticism.
Probably
and
not.
basically probably got into that as kind of an aversive reaction.
Probably so.
Right.
In thinking back to the group that was there, yes,
Yeah.
I would say so. They had most of them had come up through the 60s, 70s, through the drug-cultured era, and had done a lot of the seeking at that time, which was to, you know, leave mainframe religion and look to other things that might address the spirituality needs that they didn't feel was being addressed by the church at that time. So anyway, I started to not attend some of my meetings because I was feeling uncomfortable in the meeting. And as I started to miss more and more meetings, I noticed that some of my old dysfunctional attitudes were starting to come back up.
Yeah.
So as I lost my focus on my recovery, it started to slide right back in. And just about at that same time, and I believe it was by the grace of God, we wound up moving down here. My mom's home, where we wound up moving into to take care of my dad, was located 1 block away from New Life Church in Springfield. And as we were driving out one night, I saw a sign up there that just said, "Recovery group meets here 7 o'clock Friday night." And I was like, well, you know, I need a recovery group. I need a local group. I just figured it was another basement meeting of a traditional group. It didn't say anything about Celebrate Recovery or anything, just recovery. So when we went to
and those things are always held in churches anyway.
Well,
usually,
of course, yeah, you look for them. You look for the basement of the church. So when we went the first night to Celebrate Recovery, we walked into this environment where people were singing worship songs and praising God and praying, and my first thought was, this is no 12-step recovery group I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But it also immediately said to me, wow, this is exactly what was missing from my Al-Anon
so
program
it's kind
for
of like
me.
You came home.
It was a coming home for me, and I felt it, and I was like, oh wow, I could be here, and that began what has now been a 6.5-year process with me being involved in Celebrate Recovery, and involved in a number of different groups here in the Lane County area. I just find that, particularly for a person who already has an established relationship with Jesus Christ, if you need to be in recovery, Celebrate Recovery fills those needs a little bit easier without rubbing against some rough edges as you would in a traditional group. But the traditional groups, AA, NA, all of those groups, they've saved many, many people, including myself. So, I mean, I never say anything bad about them. I'm just saying that there's an option, and that option for that person who knows who their higher power is and doesn't need to use a nebulous higher power statement, Celebrate Recovery fills that real well.
Yeah, that comes across in the materials, definitely. So, because on the one hand, people have gotten scared off by that definitiveness and whatever they find. My bottom line, at least with the center, is okay, whatever works for you, as long as it is working for you, because the bottom line is recovery from, or at least non-use of addictive substances and also processes and other things like that. And as long as you're comfortable with that and can fit into and work that through, then great, great. So, are you ordained or lay pastor? And is that required? How does that work? How does Celebrate Recovery work?
Celebrate Recovery, when Pastor John Baker put it together, was actually put together with the concept that it would be run by lay persons.
Okay.
That it does not require a pastorally licensed person to lead the program. There are a number of churches that do have staff pastors who are actually involved with their recovery programs and thereby are also involved with Celebrate Recovery. But normally their recovery programs are even broader than just the Celebrate Recovery. They may be working in some other areas as well. But in most practices right now, at least here in Lane County, all of the groups other than the one at New Life are run by lay persons, not even lay pastors, but rather lay persons. And it's, I don't know where the qualification comes from. My qualification came from the fact that I truly felt called to leave New Life and go open another program at another location, so we would have yet another night covered with an available meeting for people to attend. And I found a landing spot at Northwood Christian Church on a different night of the week, so that we could spread again the availability of the program. So, ordained, not yet, but actually that's one of the reasons that I'm back here at Lane CC right now, is to put together my AAOT and then transfer out to NCU for that purpose. Yes. So
let's say then, I mean, we get this in my field, right? So sooner or later a client or someone asks, are you an addict or alcoholic, codependent, what qualifies you? So addict, alcoholic,
well, my
codependent.
Yeah, my codependence. Yeah. I was definitely a flame-on codependent. I mean, if you were to look up codependent, it should have had my picture in the book next to it. I also struggled in the past with nicotine addiction, which I turned over through Celebrate Recovery 4 years ago. Wow. And have been clean from that. I struggle on a daily.
Cold turkey or patch or what?
Well, no, actually, it was cold turkey this time. Actually, it was the story behind that's really strange. I was outside talking with some people during a break, and I was doing a pretty good job of lecturing about recovery and shaking my cigarette in their face as I was doing this. And I heard very clearly from behind me a voice say, "You hypocrite." And when I turned around, there was no one there.
Right.
So it hit me very quickly that, yes, I was being very hypocritical talking with people about their particular addictions while actually imbibing in one of mine. So I walked back into the group that night, and I made a pledge to the group that by the end of December, I would be nicotine-free. This was the beginning of December. And after I actually made that statement to them and asked them all to hold me accountable, you see me driving down the street and I've got a cigarette in my hand, you call me on it. When the 15th of December got there, I just said, oh, to heck with it, I'm not waiting until the end of the month. And I threw the pack of cigarettes away, and from the 15th of December of 2006, that's where we're at. No, 2005, excuse me, 4 years. Yeah. So, and it's amazing because I had quit smoking a number of times over my life. I'd smoked for 20 plus years, a pack a day. And, but the difference was when I quit previously, I always, in my mind, I saw myself as a smoker who had given up the vice of smoking. And this time, there was a renewing of my mind which said, that took away the whole concept that I'm a smoker. As far as I'm concerned in my head, I'm a non-smoker, period. Right. And it's made it so much easier in that there's absolutely no desire on my part to even think about going back to the use of nicotine.
If I'm hearing the subtext correctly, okay, it's not a simple psychological shift. You feel like there has been a spiritual rebirth.
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, for me, because I know from my previous times of quitting, the struggle that there was when it was my decision to do it by my will. To it was a power struggle for me, fighting that craving of nicotine. In this particular case, the compulsion to use the nicotine, which should be a physical craving, in fact we know it to be a physical craving, was completely removed from me. So yeah, I would have to say that there was a transformation that occurred.
And that has been observed too, though the scientists have yet to figure out how to induce that.
Yes, that would be nice.
Hey, I'd even accept laying on of hands as long as it worked for everybody.
Works. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yes. So, do you have to be a born-again Christian, Protestant, Catholic to be in Celebrate Recovery? Because we observed in the studio, for example. So, Rick's church is, they're Baptists.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So, and I came out of a Southern Baptist, my grandfather was a Baptist preacher, so, okay, I can relate somewhat. But are there, are there Catholics? Are there other denominations? What is the qualification? Because if you're making the statement, you have to accept, it's a short step from accepting Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior and turning your life over, et cetera, to, okay, that's my higher power.
The requirement, no, there's no requirement to start with. Celebrate Recovery is open to anyone who wants to walk in off the street who's just interested in recovery and possibly looking at, again, having more of a rock-solid understanding of my higher power. We have people that come in who don't know Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. They may experience the program and come to a point where they do accept Jesus as, they may not as well. That still doesn't preclude them from Celebrate Recovery. Celebrate Recovery is there. It is an evangelistic tool from the standpoint of we're not going to mince words. I'm going to stand up on this front and I'm going to tell you our higher power is Jesus Christ, the Son of God. We're not going to we're going to mix that.
Not mincing words.
Yeah, and if you can accept that, even though that's not where you're at, then I accept you. Okay, that's not a problem at all. In fact,
plus not using.
Well, yes, that's the other part of it. Yes, of course. But we have people that I've been working with for the past year or so that are from the Mormon Church, the Zen Buddhist, couple of other Eastern mysticism positions. I've had in the past, not recently, but I think 3 years ago, I worked with 2 young men who were from the Muslim faith. And again, as long as we can find the common ground to stand on, I just present this as this is where I'm at, this is where my belief is, and come let us reason together. And if that's where they're touched and led to, then that's where they're touched and led to. And if the program works for them from a sobriety standpoint, fantastic.
Yeah. Interesting that you mention Muslims, because technically their religion forbids the use of alcohol.
Right.
So then but in the field we found this thing where, especially if they've been exposed to Western culture and become kind of assimilated to those values, that's where they develop their alcohol problems. So you might not in an intervention, you might not be able to refer directly to it. You say you have a hashish problem, knowing that you're talking about alcohol. So I mean, the little games that we play.
Right.
So okay, so if the requirement is simply not so much about the religious part, you're overt about that. So a desire to live a non-addicted life then.
And actually, Celebrate Recovery has helped the mainstream church out dramatically in that same area, because even as you're saying, within the Muslim faith, they're not allowed to use. There were so many of the Christian churches would look down on people because they had a problem with alcohol or they had a problem with drugs or whatnot, basing it on, quote unquote, you've made a bad moral choice in your life. And Celebrate Recovery has come out and said within the church, listen, our church is a safe place for you to come and admit that you have a problem with alcohol. Because you come into here and you say, I have a problem, we're not going to throw you out the door on Sunday morning. That's not what we're here for. We're here to love you. We're here to restore you. We're here to help you get your life back on track where you need to be. And that, within the past, I'd say 30 years, has actually been a big turnaround inside of a lot of the mainstream churches. They used to, in fact, to this day, I hear a lot of pastors when I'm speaking with them say, we don't have any kind of problem like that in our church. And I'm like, I say a quick prayer in my mind and say, oh, if you only knew, because every organization has got someone that's experiencing some kind of hurt, habit, or hang-up. And whether it may not actually be chemical in nature, there are things going on there. We deal with people that are struggling with pornography as an addiction, sexual addictions, overeaters, body image addictions, anorexia and bulimia, self-injury, people that are into doing self-injury. I mean, all of these different aspects cause walls between what we should be living and where we are right now. And that's what we try to seek and help people work through in Celebrate Recovery, is that process to remove that dysfunction so that they can have the abundant life that Jesus promised in John 10:10.
Quote that line.
The thief comes to kill and destroy, but I come to bring life, not just life, but life abundant. Okay. So, and that's the issue. It's one thing to just say, it's great when you have a relationship with Christ and you have salvation and so forth, but you can still be, while you have that, you can still be living less than an abundant lifestyle, being pressed down by these worldly conditions that can hold us back. And so that's something that we seek to get free from through Celebrate Recovery.
That's a great segue, because in reading John's story, I mean, okay, so John Baker, right? He talks about, okay, I accepted Jesus Christ into my heart at an early age, and high school football, and all that stuff. Okay, and what I'm reading is the typical American drug arc of, okay, fine, you're not going to do street drugs, or maybe you are not talking about it, but you're becoming an alcoholic, and that's normal, even if you are within a Christian framework. And then, great, you're a successful businessman, et cetera, marriage and all that kind of stuff, kids, and okay, great, but you're a drunk. And nobody's talking about it or not using the A word, alcoholic, in your presence, but that's what you are.
That's what you are.
I mean, you meet the clinical definition, even though you're not even thinking about the clinical definition. But so for me, and talking in terms of, okay, what I teach in my classes, it's like, look, addiction is not only big business, but has become so normalized throughout our society that it's not unusual to find people that are essentially strung out, and it doesn't matter that they're strung out on legal drugs, that they're still doing damage. And so when you have pastors, priests, whoever, who are on the bottle, and it doesn't matter that they can deliver a stirring sermon or whatever, their lives are being downpressed, as you talked about. So he makes a change at some point, and he talks about that triggering. So there's layers and layers within, the simple acceptance of Christ into your heart does not necessarily mean you have become free of that.
No,
so I'm glad to, I want to make that explicit.
No, it'd be great if it was. In fact, in my testimony, when I give my testimony, I say, and I accepted Jesus Christ, and therefore my life from that point on was just perfect. Bzzz. No, that's not the way that works. I know many people within Celebrate Recovery who, like me with my nicotine, even in their particular cases, they were methamphetamine addicts or alcohol addicts, that God reached into their life and removed that compulsion. But just because they were no longer had a compulsion to do the drug, they still had a whole bunch of junk in their trunk that had driven them to use the drug to start with.
Right.
And if you ignore that and let it set back there, don't work it through a recovery program, you're just putting off the inevitable time when you go back to that self-medicating, dysfunctional lifestyle, because you still have the same problem with you. And that's what we do in Celebrate Recovery. When we take people and work through the 12-step program, we're trying to address that junk, trying to actually drill down into it, find out what it is that's caused us to act out. And one of the things that we differ between the traditional groups is that we kind of do an umbrella over all of the different hurts, habits, and hang-ups. And a lot of people would say, well, you really can't do that because it takes an alcoholic to know an alcoholic, or a heroin addict to talk to a heroin addict, and so forth.
Nice tribe.
And I say, no, not really. Those are just symptoms. They're all symptoms, different symptoms, albeit, but they're symptoms of the core problem, which is here. My symptom was I acted out trying to control other people's events in their life and what would happen with them. I was a control freak. That's the primary thing for codependence.
And was your life in control?
Oh, of course not. My life was controlled by everybody else around me. However their feelings made me feel the way it was.
The plank in your eye, the mote in theirs. Yes,
absolutely. And enabling and all of that stuff. That was the way I acted out. I didn't act out with alcohol or with drugs, but that doesn't make me any different from the person that did act out with alcohol and drugs. It just means that we walked a slightly different road. But the core issues right here, I found out when going through the process that I was dealing with issues of abandonment that I didn't realize. I was adopted when I was 4 days old. And I've always known that I was adopted, and I never really thought intellectually that this caused me a problem. But emotionally, I was harboring this abandonment issue. And part of that abandonment was, the way to fix it was when you get into a relationship with someone, you make yourself so incredibly important in their life, there's no way in the world that they could ever leave you. You see, so it feeds that codependency, and
they may not physically leave you, but they leave in other ways.
They leave in other ways, my favorite one is looking back. I was trying to hold on to my wife and at the same time push her away. And it's amazing that we even survived through that point.
So you found answers for that in terms of action steps, because let me kind of bring out some of my concerns as a therapist, right? So I have degrees in psych, and so naturally, apart from and also in addition to whatever spiritual framework I operate from, personally and or professionally, matching the client or not, whatever, I got to look at the psychological tools in terms of getting at that junk in the trunk. And if my father, the psychiatrist, would contend that only psychiatrists have that training, which of course we disagree on that. But you're delivering a program that's pretty much lay people. The requirement is simply a desire to stop using and to accept Jesus Christ and follow these action steps in the acrostics, etc., etc. And you find that sufficient?
Well, there's actually 3 components to Celebrate Recovery.
Yes.
There's the large group meeting, during which time we are able to use worship, praise, prayer, and we use those things primarily to focus. I remember going to a traditional meeting and coming from work. all razzle-frazzled by everything that was going on and going right straight into my meeting. And probably for the first 20 minutes of that meeting, I wasn't hearing a thing that was being said by the speaker, by whomever was whatever.
In
because I wasn't focused.
Speakers meeting or whatever. Yeah.
It's just no way.
Yeah.
So in Celebrate Recovery, one of the first things we do is we come together and we spend that first 20 minutes of the large group meeting in worship and in praise and basically just focusing down to where we need to be. So we can even hear what is going to be put out for us. So, which is one of the nice things about having a centering on Jesus, is that you have that available. You don't have to try and accommodate everybody's different possible religious beliefs. You just, you come together, you worship, you praise, we spend time doing that.
Back up for a second, okay? I think I know what you're talking about, but for the non-Christians in our audience, what do you mean by worship and praise?
Well, we'll
what kind of activities?
We'll sing songs, and
okay.
we try and maintain those songs today to today's culture.
Okay.
So I mean, we're doing contemporary Christian music songs.
Okay, so music.
It's music,
right?
Yes, very much music.
Okay.
We, there's always an opening prayer time where we invite the Holy Spirit to be amongst us, to come there and be there, the invocation of that. Yeah. We do go through the worshiping time. There will be some reading of, in this particular case, we'll read either 12 steps and their biblical corollaries or the recovery principles and their corollaries from Sermon on the Mount. So all of this, and then normally we ramp that all the way down into something that's very personal, very, very reflective time of singing particular songs that bring it down, and everyone there, to the level that they care to, tries to reach out and be in contact with God to whatever point that is. And I've seen Celebrate Recovery meetings that were as boisterous as any Pentecostal church that was in touch with the Spirit of God, and I've seen people sitting as if they were in the local Lutheran church, very much. And again, it's for each individual personally to come to the point where they need to be in order to experience that issue. But the point being that we can focus.
Yes.
So that the next part of that large meeting is either a teaching, a lesson, which will be based on one of the 25 lessons that have been written about the 12 steps by Pastor John, or testimony. And it's pretty much, it's not on a perfect schedule of every other week, but pretty much it's a lesson one week and a testimony the next week, and a lesson and a testimony. And testimony nights are amazing, because the person that gets up there and gives their testimony, I've never seen a bad testimony. Because again, you're looking at somebody whose life has been touched by God, and gives you the feeling that, you know what, if he can do it for them, why can't he do it for me? And so it's a hope step, a huge hope step for a lot of people, the first time that they may experience that. Just as I did the first time I went into an Al-Anon meeting, and just realizing that, gee, there are other people out here.
Yeah,
so I mean, that's
I'm
the
not alone.
reason. Yes, exactly. Right. So that's the first component. The second component is that we have what's called open share groups. Now, everything in Celebrate Recovery is done, other than the main group with the worship time, is done on a gender-based basis. So the women will break into...
Gender-segregated.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the women will break off into their groups, the men will break off into their groups, and then they have the opportunity to share what's been going on in their life, any burning desire that's on their heart, anything that they need to. It can be struggles, it can be praises, how well things have been going last week, whatever that in that share group. And this is where people start to develop relationships with one another, so that they can actually form accountability structures where I can reach out to, like you, Mark, and say, I'm struggling today, and I know that you're going to listen to me, not just blow me off and say, okay, fine, you're struggling. And the one, when we look at the 12
You call
steps,
them within your framework accountability partners.
We have two.
And sponsors, yes?
We have sponsors, just as they do in the traditional.
Okay.
Who are, if you will, your 12-step life coach. They're supposed to be leading you through, giving you the instructions that you need to get through that 12-step. Then you have accountability partners who are more along the same level with you, in that they're not particularly the guy who's mentoring you and telling you how to get through this, but they're the guy that's going to go to the club and work out with you on a daily basis, so that you don't feel like you're doing it on your own. Right. accountability structure has really helped, at least from my experience, it's helped maintain sobriety for a lot of people, rather than just that sponsorial relationship.
Okay.
So we have that time. And the primary reason that we do that is, well, there's two reasons. One, it gives people a little bit more freedom to openly share about some of your struggles. There are struggles that I have had that I wouldn't actually have liked to share in a mixed company group. And if I didn't feel comfortable, I wouldn't, okay? So by breaking into a men's and women's group, you open that area up. But the other one is that we eliminate 13-step working. Okay? Celebrate Recovery is not where you go to find your date.
At least among heterosexuals, anyway.
Well, yes, at least among heterosexuals.
Yeah.
But so much, if you go around in different places, you'll hear people say, "Oh, you know, that particular AA meeting is a meat market." Mm-hmm. You know, and we try and stop that by our structure. Mm-hmm. You know, AA makes the statement that we will not organize, we will not have leaders, and so forth, right. and that's fine, that's good. Yeah. We do, and we do for a purpose. Every single leader in Celebrate Recovery is charged with the primary purpose of maintaining the safety of the group. And that means that if I see someone who's routinely showing up and hitting on some girl over here who's just new in recovery and so forth, and I was thinking about this the other day, getting ready to meet with you, and I thought, you know what, I've never actually seen someone in Lane County actually be told, please don't come back to a meeting because of this. Mm-hmm. Normally, all it takes is for a leader to go up and say, hey, we don't do that here. And they either will ramp themselves back because they're still interested in the recovery program, or they'll choose to not come back on their own. Right. I can't think of any time that we've actually said, you're not welcome to be here. Okay. So that's the second part, is the open share group. The third part, which is actually where most of the work and most of the rubber hits the road, is our 12-step groups. They're designed to take about a year to go through, and they're a commitment group. So when you start off, you commit to that once-a-week meeting with these different people. As you work through them, we have participants guides. Well, we have participants guides that have been written for us that actually ask, take us through it, and it really depends.
There are 4 of them.
There are 4 books that break out the full 12 steps. Actually, the first book is the first 3 steps. The second book just deals with inventory, which is the biggest chunk of the program, and then the next 2 books tie up steps 5 through 12. But when I went through, I had done my 12-step originally in Al-Anon. And at that point in time, pretty much the person who was sponsoring me just said, well, here's the steps, go work them. Oh, that's great if you don't know what they are. What does it mean?
Do we have a big book? There was Lois weigh in on this?
Yeah, I mean, there was some stuff, but it wasn't intuitive, if you will. And not only that, but when I did that 12-step, I did take an inventory. However, I would question how moral my inventory was, because my morality compass was just set on a free-floating needle of what the world considered to be moral. Yes. Now, when I came in to Celebrate Recovery, and I'm going to use Jesus Christ as the center of my recovery, my compass has changed. And so I realized very shortly in that I probably should be doing another 12-step that was moral focused. And so that's the group that does the most of the work. Now, the one I went through, there were 10 men in the group, and I developed relationships over that year's period of time with those men. First off, they were men not just of codependent nature, there were addicts within this group because it's a mixed group. I have to say that personally, going into that 12-step group, I really didn't have a whole lot of affinity for addicts, okay? Because in my mind, there was still, those are the people who caused me my pain and my problems, okay? And I needed to get rid of it. But setting in a group for a year and listening to these guys share from their hearts where they've been, the struggles they've gone through, how they got there.
There but for the grace.
Well, and what I realized was the only difference was my symptomology. I acted out in power and control. They acted out in chemicals. And I became very aware of how much more similar we were than how much different we were. And out of that, I know tonight, and that's been 4 years ago since I completed that with those 10 guys. I could pick up the phone tonight at 3 o'clock in the morning, call any one of those 10 guys and say, I'm struggling, and they wouldn't ask what the problem is. They'd just say, where are you? And I'll be there in 5 minutes. And I've developed relationships with each one of those men that are deeper than any relationship I could have ever even had with my siblings. So it's when you share that common experience of dysfunction and going through the recovery process, the binding or the bonding which goes on is just, it's phenomenal. And then again, it's all based on we care about each other from the standpoint of love. And so if you need me, you're going to call me, I'm going to get up and I'm going to be there for you. And so it's a great struggle from that. But that's the third step. And that's where the work gets done. I mean, that's where you were asking about the action stuff. That's where we get right straight down into it. The questions that John wrote in these processes, I mean, they're built to drill down and drill down. You know, what's the secret that you had in your family? You know, and a lot of times it's like, we never had a secret in my family. You know, you're just, and he's trying to help you work through the denial phase.
Right.
You know, just to start with, and he asks some more questions, and then pretty soon I'm realizing, oh, you know, I guess my father was actually a little codependent with my mother, and I learned that from him. So, you know, a lot of people would say, well, your wife's a drunk and that's why you became a codependent. And I look back at it and go, oh no, I was codependent at 16, well before I met her. So the codependent came well before the drunk in this particular case.
So one of the things I was looking at through the site, and one of the things I check for, not that I'm looking for flies in the ointment, but, you know, most of my career has been basically working with people that nobody else wants to work with, right. Or, you know, kind of, I'm not necessarily saying I'm like Yeshua, but I notice who we hung out with.
That's right.
The undesirables. You know, what you have done to the least of these, you've done to me. So I was looking, you know, for racial and ethnic diversity, and I know that one of the you know, Obama's crazy like a fox. So definitely he took some hits in the GLBT community for having Rick do that invocation. And, you know, what impressed me about Rick, even though I'm generally not down with conservatives because I think Yeshua is a radical, so it's like, you're going to follow him. Let's be radical here. But, you know, he did, you know, say, you know, Yeshua and then Isa and then Jesus and then Jesus, just so you know he was talking about who he was talking about and being inclusive. So, you know, my psychological training and my cultural framework as an African and an Indian, gay and lesbians are part of my community and an integral part of my community and an integral part of the faith community as well. Absolutely. And I was at this African American treatment conference over the weekend in Tacoma. So yes, boom, we start with prayer. Boom, we talk about racism, and yes, you know, we are not going to exclude the choir director because these folks are part of our community and helped us integrally. And we've got this common foe with addiction, and addiction is slavery. So of course we've got to talk about racism and all the other stuff. So that piece about the inclusivity, you know, let's start with sexual orientation first.
Sexual orientation. I've worked with a number of people that have said that their sexual orientation is towards their own gender. I've worked with some people that say that they've gotten to a point where that lifestyle for them personally is not compatible, and so they're struggling with how I feel versus what I believe. Okay, and my point has always been to try not and judge people. You know, I know what I believe in the Bible personally for myself. I have a number of friends who are in relationships, gay relationships, that they know that I don't believe that their lifestyle is one that is blessed by God, but that does not mean that I don't love them. In fact, I do love them. I love them very much. In fact, they know that that's the reason that I talk with them when I love them, because if I'm right and the Bible is right, and this is what's going to be at the end, okay, I don't really want them to come under that kind of a judgment situation. But for each person, it's choices and consequences. You know, you'll have your choice to make just as I do, and you'll have your consequences just as I do. I don't judge what your consequences are going to be. All I can do really is pray for you and hope that it's accepted without me placing a judgment on you and saying, you know, you're wrong, you're bad, because that doesn't make you wrong and bad. It just makes you not in line with what I believe God has said in the Word. But anyone that shows up, we've had people who were openly homosexual, but they wanted to deal with a chemical addiction, and they're more than welcome to be there and work through the process. However, they understand that it's a similar situation. If I see a guy come to a meeting and I see him trying to pick up a guy in the guys group, I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to say, no, that's not what we do here. This is not our hookup spot. Okay, yeah. There are other places to do that.
Right.
So we try and stay focused again on the issues of the recovery, and not so much on the broad issues that we can fight about. I'd rather find the stuff that we can agree on and move forward from there, and then see how the Spirit moves. So.
Okay. And in terms of acceptance, so then the other piece, and the reason I deliberately put those things together is because of you know, things that I was raised with.
Right.
Because, you know, Grandpa, basically, I'm a black liberation theologist. So for me, the image of Christ is a black dreadlock.
Sure.
Right? Speaking Aramaic. Right? So Grandpa said, look, this is the Bible that said the way they interpret in the English-speaking, you know, Jesus didn't actually, his name wasn't Jesus, but okay, know these, thous, and those, and he's not speaking Greek, and so, you know, no, we weren't cursed by God, and that's why we're black. No, we're not down with that, but that was taught, okay, in the 20th century, and people still believe that and still hold to that. And so, so, you know, he was saying, look, that's what they said about us, and they were wrong. They ain't saying that now, but they're also saying God made us this way, and we're blessed for being this way. And so, by extension, you know, there are, at least from the native framework, look, God intended them to be like that. So, you know, all right, we can set that part aside, but, you know, can I bring my African self into your group? Because, you know, when I look on the video, I only see one black face, and I begin to wonder, you know, Orange County wasn't too friendly to me. So
yeah,
and neither was Oregon.
Yeah, and I, you know, I can't speak for any other organization, including the national organization down in Orange County. I can speak for our organization, and our organization is open to anyone of any race, color, creed, whatever the situation is. Right now we're working with a number of men from Eugene Gospel Mission who are coming to our group, and love them dearly. And so I would say that there's probably a little bit more diversity within our group because we're working with some of the people off of the streets or in homeless situations
prison,
than if we were trying to just work within the confines of our church. It would be hard for me within the confines of the church.
Because that's part of the image that I see. It's like, okay, you know, $12 videos, this, that, and the other. Yeah, if you're coming from poverty, prison. Are you doing a prison outreach? You're working with AIDS patients, et cetera,
and that's, you know, and I'm in complete agreement with you, Mark. I would much rather hang out with the Beale Street crowd than the stained glass crowd, because that's where Jesus would be. And you know, we work from that standpoint, and that's the biggest thing that I have tried to instill within our group is that I believe that relapse is a part of recovery. And what I try to instill is when you fall down, when you bang up your knees or your nose or whatever, don't let the shame and the guilt keep you from walking back through that door. Because when you come through that door, I'm going to be here to love on you, to dust you off, to stand you back up, and to get you back on this path. And too many times you've seen people that when they're doing the right thing, everybody's behind them, but let them fall just for a moment, and they're bums, and we don't want anything to do with them.
Come back and sin no more is what the Master said.
That is definitely not what I believe my Jesus would have said to these people. So, you know, I try and develop the program based off of that. But again, I'm speaking only for my organization or my group. Each individual organization has its own personality, and you know, rightly so. That's what makes us different. It's the diversity, I believe.
But at least having the conversation means that it could spread elsewhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. So,
yeah.
Okay, good.
Final thoughts.
I appreciated the chance to be here and talk with you tonight.
Yeah.
You know, we're just we have 10 groups now in Lane County, and when I started, there were only 2 groups in Lane County. And one of the things that we have as a county organization been striving for was to get groups every night of the week, so that a person could basically say, you need to go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and here's the meetings you can go to.
Yeah.
So this is a good time, and we've just had, If anyone has any, would like any more information, I think it's up on the screen right now. You can reach me at my phone number. That's my cell phone, and you can go ahead and call me anytime to get that information, and we'd be happy to give it to you. So,
well, if you've liked, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mark.
It's been a pleasure having you. If you like what you've seen, email us at liveclass@lanecc.edu. Put DiversiTV in the subject line. Tell us what you liked. Tell a friend about this show and other shows. This will be rebroadcast 9 o'clock on Friday night, or saturation reruns during spring break and summer vacation, and available on the web sometime later this year if all our upgrades go as planned. So until then, go well, stay well, shalama, and peace be with you.